Using an example to calculate the factorial of a number using functions, we shall continue our journey to understand some more terminology associated with functions. So first let's understand the program. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the factorial of a number using functions. So what I have done here is I have created or declared or defined a function called as factorial. So if you see, this is similar to what we do before. I have taken an integer variable called fact. Using the for loop, I have multiplied fact with I, and as long as I is greater than 1, the repeat process keeps on happening. Factorial is calculated and sent back here. So let us say the user enters 5. The value of 5 is stored in n. Okay, this is how you can take a look at the diagram. In main, n is a variable whose address can be, say, 4000. User asks for the factorial of 5. So what I do is I try to print this statement, but this can't be printed because there is a calculation here. This is a function call. So this n value gets copied to a variable called num, which may exist at an example location of 6000. Now using this value of fact equal to 1 and I is equal to 5, I am multiplying fact with I as long as the value of I is greater than 1. Then I am sending back the value of fact, which happens to be 120, in this place of factorial of n. So factorial is, it will print 120 and do a return 0. So a few concepts are required or require explanation before we can proceed further. This is the factorial function definition. Calling function, called function. This is the function call. These are known as parameters. This is also a parameter because it's used to communicate the value of n across to here. Now, before I can use this factorial function, I need to show the signature, prototype or blueprint to the compiler. If you look, what is the prototype? Name. Return. It is returning an integer value. What is the data type of the parameter it is accepting? It happens to be int because n is also an int. So this is a must. So a function prototype is must and it must be done in the calling function. So the general format of the function prototype is return type. In our type, return type is what? Int. Function name factorial bracket. Then you can mention the data type along with some name, or you are only required to mention the data type. You don't require to mention the name. So stick with this, just mention the data type. So this is the general form of the function prototype. So what does the prototype specify and why is it required? The function prototype specifies how this function is going to be used by this calling function to the compiler. So it describes the interface or how they are going to interact. That's why when you used cout, cin, square root, you had to include iostream.h, mat.h, string.h, because the compiler was interested to know whether you are using the right function, sending the right data type, whether it's returning the right value. So all this information is required for the compiler. That's why you declare a prototype. So prototype contains name, return type, number or data type of arguments. Here the number and data type happens to be int and one number of argument. So what does the compiler do? As I told, the compiler verifies this prototype declaration signature with the definition. If there is any difference, it will straight away flag a compiler error, so you can correct it appropriately. Now here I can say int space x or int space num, any variable, but I can just specify only the data type. Only the data type is mandatory. The name of the variable is optional. A function prototype is like a declaration of a variable, so it must end with a semicolon, whereas a function definition does not end with a semicolon. So notice these two differences. It's ending with a semicolon. Here there is no semicolon. Now we shall head to understand some more terminology associated with functions, because functions is very simple except that it's got a lot of terminology and words to understand. You just need to understand those few half a dozen terminology or words. So let's try to understand the terminology or words. So an expression or variable in the function header is called a argument. Okay, so types of argument. This fellow can be an expression 2 plus 3 into 6, or it can be a variable. This n is known as an argument. Okay, this is known as the actual parameter or the actual argument. This number is known as the formal parameter or the formal argument. I'll repeat. Whatever is in the calling function is the actual parameter or the for actual argument. This is the formal parameter or the formal argument. Why do we use arguments? Arguments are used to communicate between this main function to this. Without arguments, how the value of n can be sent to factorial? Because of arguments, I am able to send the value of n to number. Okay, it is used to pass information. What are actual arguments and what are formal arguments? I've already told you. Actual arguments. If I'm saying fact is equal to factorial of n, this n is an actual argument. Now, what are formal arguments? The formal arguments are basically here. Int num is an example of a formal argument. The function header contains the return type, name of the function, data type of the formal argument or formal parameter, and a name associated with it. If there are more than one, you can say int num comma int x comma int y and so on. You cannot simply say int x comma y comma z. Each variable has to be declared with the data type. Formal arguments, number gets the value from n, which happens to be an actual argument. So this particular fellow is an example of the actual function definition header. Number is an example of the formal argument or formal parameter. A few important points. If there is one argument here, there must be one here. The data type of n here must be the same as data type of number here. Okay, so and the order, if I'm specifying n first, number should be first. The first variable here will be copied in the first location. The second variable here will be copied in the second location. Therefore, the number, order and data type of actual and formal arguments must be perfectly in sync or match each other. You may have different names. This may be n, this may be x, this may be number, whatever it is. That's absolutely not a problem. These formal arguments must always be variables. They cannot be expressions. This must be a variable. This can be a expression. So with this, I hope you have understood a little more bit about different terminology associated with functions.